Hey guys, welcome back to another movie related video, and for today's video, in anticipation of Captain America Brave New World coming out tonight, I'm going to be sharing my personal ranking of every movie in the MCU from Iron Man to Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, normally I like to wait until the current MCU phase is complete to rank each movie, but I didn't want to wait until May to do a new ranking video. Also, for this video, I will only be ranking the films that are part of phases 1 through 5 that have gotten a Blu-ray release. I will save ranking the Disney Plus TV series for another video. I think every film in the MCU is good in their own way, so just because some films are lower on the list doesn't mean I think they are bad. This is just how I personally rank each of the films. Also, I'm going to be talking about specific details from each of the MCU films, so for anyone who hasn't seen them all, spoiler alert. Now, on to the rankings. At number 34, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. When I first watched this movie, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first two films, but I still had a fun time with it. Upon rewatch, I still have fun with this movie, but it definitely is not the first two. This film tries unsuccessfully to be more serious than the first two. A lot of the CGI gets hard to look at, and the characters make many questionable decisions. I like that the writers tried to show us more of the quantum realm. I like the performance of the cast, and I liked most of the jokes when they landed. I think most of the problems come from Kang being the main villain, as I feel he should be able to easily defeat a single Avenger one-on-one, and it makes him seem like a joke when he is defeated by Ant-Man, of all people. Overall, the film is fine, but it is definitely weaker than the first two. At number 33, we have The Marvels. I'm not gonna lie, I don't remember a whole lot of this movie, and I don't really care to revisit it. For the most part, this film offers nothing new and is very formulaic. The plot and the main villain are very forgettable. The writing is strange and it has very awkward pacing. The main draw for this film is the performance of the three main leads, as they act very well off of each other. The effects are pretty good, and I remember the jokes being pretty funny for the most part. Overall, the film is okay from what I remember, but it doesn't really offer much different from what we've seen in the MCU before. At number 32, we have The Eternals. Even though Eternals is so low in my personal ranking, I don't think it is as bad a film as most people say it is. Yes, there are a number of issues with it, but I think those issues mainly arise from how the story is presented. I have heard people say that this would have worked better as a TV series, and I would have to agree. Everything that is presented in the film is interesting to me: the plot, the characters, and the role that the Eternals play in the Marvel Universe. The cast does great, the effects are great, the direction is great. There is a lot of ground to cover, and it results in a very long film with just too much going on. I feel like if we had a TV series, it could help the pacing by breaking things up into digestible episodes. Overall, I like the film okay, but I don't think I'll find myself revisiting it too often since it is really long and overstuffed. At number 31, we have Thor: Love and Thunder. You know, I find it funny how even though most people put the Thor films lower in their personal rankings of the MCU movies, he was the first Avenger to get 4 movies. As much as I like the Thor movies, this one is definitely the weakest one for a few reasons. Firstly, the tone is very inconsistent as it tries to balance goofy and serious for the whole 2-hour runtime. Next, the CGI is very rough in a lot of parts. Finally, they introduce Lady Thor and get rid of her way too quickly. That being said, it is an MCU film, so it offers great visuals, good performances from the cast, specifically Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher, and when the emotional moments hit, you really feel them. Overall, the 4th Thor movie heavily suffers from its flaws, but it is still a fun movie that offers great action, even if it is a far cry from the first Thor movie. At number 30, we have Black Widow. This is a decent movie that came out at the wrong time. There's a lot to like with Black Widow's solo movie. I like the performance of the cast, I like the action set pieces, and I like that we get a good look at Black Widow's past. This film gives me a lot of the same gripes as other MCU films, such as some moments having unpolished CGI, some of the jokes aren't always funny, and the weird decisions to make changes to well-established Marvel Comics characters. Looking at you, Taskmaster. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid action movie about Black Widow that just came out too late. If this had come out sometime in between Infinity War and Endgame, I'm sure the fan base would have been more pleased with it back when it first came out. At number 29, we have Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. There were a lot of things going against this movie. With the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman and Marvel's decision to not cast or recast T'Challa, they had to make some serious writing decisions for this follow-up. For the most part, I enjoyed this movie, but it definitely had some flaws. This film has a slow build-up to the climax. There was more action from a lot of the side characters than there were from Black Panther, and I'm still a little unsure about the choice for the main antagonists. Still, I think the writers did the best with what they could. The cast does very well, the action is stylish and solid, and there are some very well written callbacks to the first film. Overall, as a sequel to Black Panther, this movie is not that great, but as an origin movie for the new Black Panther, it is pretty good. At number 28, we have Iron Man 3. So, like I said in the last ranking video, I like a lot of things about the third film in the Iron Man trilogy. I like the cast, I like the action, I like a lot of the ideas. Shane Black's direction makes the film feel like something out of the spy thriller genre, which I really enjoy. Like I said in the last video, there are just as many things that I disliked, such as the poor execution of the villains, the wasted potential of specific story ideas, and the very, very weak after-credit scenes. Overall, I still think this is a pretty fun movie to watch, but when compared to a lot of the other stuff that the MCU has to offer, this film really doesn't have that much going for it. So that's why it is my number 28 pick. At number 27, we have Thor: The Dark World. Like I said with Thor: Love and Thunder, I really enjoy all of the Thor movies as much as most of the MCU movies that have come out. And personally, I think a lot of the Thor movies are pretty underrated. That being said, when compared to most of the MCU movies that have come out, I have to agree with most people that say that Thor: The Dark World is one of the weaker movies that the MCU has put out. Really, this movie feels like something to hold us over until the next major MCU movie comes out, and I feel like that's still the case even with the later phases. But that being said, I still really think it's a well-made and fun watch overall, but it does suffer from a lot of the same problems as Iron Man 3. As I said in my last video, the main draw for this movie is definitely the dynamic between Thor and Loki, which are played by Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston respectively, and they just have a fun chemistry together, so, you know, that's really the main draw for this movie for me. At number 26, we have The Incredible Hulk. Again, this is another movie in the MCU that I think is criminally underrated. I like the cast performances, I like the action, I like the plot, I like the direction. I especially like Edward Norton's take on Bruce Banner because I really think that he brings something to the role that really kind of establishes that tragic dynamic between Bruce Banner and his alter ego, the Hulk. And I also really like the post-credit scene with Robert Downey Jr. It was one of the first ones that was used to establish the MCU in the first place. With all that being said, the only other problem that I have with this movie is that the Hulk doesn't really have a whole lot to do in this movie besides fight with the military or fight the Abomination. And so for most of the movie, we're basically just following Bruce Banner as he tries to get rid of his other half. So personally, I do think this is an interesting movie just for that dynamic, but it definitely needs more Hulk action to justify it as an Incredible Hulk movie. Overall, still a good movie, but not as good when compared to some of the other films the MCU has had to offer. At number 25, we have the first Thor movie. Again, this is another film that I feel like is very criminally underrated by most Marvel fans. Sure, this film doesn't have as much Thor action as we go on to see in later Thor films, but I think this one is definitely a visual spectacle, especially with the scenes on Asgard. There are even some scenes on Earth that are nice to look at. Most of the cast in this movie do really well. I think they're very excellently cast in their roles. And there's really not much to say other than this is just a really fun visual movie to watch. And it looks great on Blu-ray. So even though this movie gives us more of a fish out of water comedy than a superhero origin story, I still think that the visuals are enough to justify it as still being a pretty good movie and why I ranked it higher on my list. If it's been a while since you've seen this one, I definitely recommend going back and giving it a watch, especially on Blu-ray, because, like I said, it's a real visual treat. At number 24, we have Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man movie. This is still, I feel like, one of the most unique movies to come out of the MCU. It's also one of my favorite Marvel movies, even though it's ranked at number 24. I feel like this movie is a nice blend between action, comedy, and heist movies. I said in my original video that I was very hesitant when they announced that Paul Rudd was going to be Scott Lang, just because of the version of Scott Lang that I was introduced to in the comics and the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes cartoon. But after seeing his performance in this movie, it has definitely changed my mind and shown that Paul Rudd has some pretty good range. I think the only gripe that I complained about with this movie is that it's kind of awkwardly paced, and I think that is mainly due to the fact that they had to switch directors from Edgar Wright to Peyton Reed. But that's really all I have to say about this movie. I still really very much enjoy it. I liked everything about it, and I still think it's a worthy entry in the MCU. At number 23, we have Captain America: The First Avenger. And back in the day, I wasn't a real big fan of war movies, but I am a really big fan of war movies now, and this one has really changed in my opinion. I ranked it at number 23 because what the MCU has to offer later definitely has more to offer than this movie, but I still really enjoy this movie. I said in my last video that the first Captain America movie is like a passionate love letter to the golden age of comic books and superheroes, but I also think it's a very nice love letter to adventure movies in general, and that has to do with the director being, I believe it's Joe Johnston. The way he directs his movies they were very adventurous. I think he was the director of Jurassic Park 3, so, you know, you kind of understand the kind of direction that he does, but I think he was a very good pick for this movie. Overall, even though this is clearly a setup to get to the Avengers, I still think it's a really strong first chapter in the Captain America trilogy, and I can't wait to see where they take the character of Captain America now that Sam Wilson is Captain America in the fourth movie. At number 22, we have Avengers: Age of Ultron. So this one kind of played the long game. I mentioned in my original video that this one is definitely one to set up Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War, and I definitely feel like that's still the case now. I still think for me this is definitely the weakest Avengers movie, but you know, I have more appreciation for it now. I still have a lot of the same gripes that I did in that initial ranking video reaction, you know, the fact that they introduced Quicksilver only to kill him off very quickly. The editing and pacing were a little awkward at times, and really it was just made, I feel, for the most part, to set up Phase 3 of the MCU. But with that being said, you know, this movie is still very near and dear to my heart. I really do like the cast performance. I like the plot of the movie. I like the acting. I like the visual spectacle of these movies. Even though this movie isn't as polished as some of the later movies, I still was really pumped when this film came out, and I still really enjoy watching it to this day. At number 21, we have Thor Ragnarok. So I think I still consider this one the best Thor movie out of all four of the Thor movies that have come out. You know, this movie was director Taika Waititi's first attempt at doing a Thor movie, and I think he really knocked it out of the park. He definitely cranked up the action. He definitely cranked up the humor. This was kind of the beginning of Thor becoming more of a goofy character, and it kind of clashes in tone with the first two movies, and it definitely gets more problematic in the fourth movie, but I still think that it was a pretty good balance with this movie. In my original ranking video, I did complain that they did change a lot about Thor in this movie, you know, in terms of his character and his relationships, but I think in the long run it definitely made Thor a stronger character, and I definitely think that they were really wise decisions to make in order for Thor to move on and grow as a character later on in the MCU. So I appreciate this movie a lot more now, and it's still pretty high up on my list of MCU movies, so I'm really glad to have this one in the collection, and I like to revisit it whenever I get the chance to, and that is why it is at number 21. At number 20, we have Iron Man 2, and I mentioned in the first ranking video that this one has a very near and dear place in my heart because it was the first MCU movie that I watched in theaters, and that still is the case for me today. I still definitely think that this one is not as good as the first movie, but then again, that seems to be a reoccurring issue with a lot of the sequels for the MCU movies, but you know, I still have a soft spot. I still think this one is very action-packed. I still think the effects look really good, and I just really like the story overall, a lot more than a lot of the more recent MCU movies. I still think there's definitely a lot of issues still in this movie that I pointed out in that first ranking video, but all in all, I just can't stay mad at this movie, and I really enjoy it still. It's a fun watch. That is why it is at number 20 of my list. At number 19, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So I think for me personally, this one is my least favorite of the Guardians trilogy, but I still think it's a really good movie in its own right. I think in the first ranking video, I had mentioned that my main problem with this movie was that there was a lot of points in the movie where they kind of interrupted pretty important scenes to throw in a random joke every once in a while. And I still feel like that is very strongly the case even now. But I definitely think that this movie was very good in developing the characters of the Guardians and getting them ready for the Avengers movies. So a lot of my same criticisms and a lot of my same praises for this movie, but overall it's at number 19 of my list, so I still really enjoy it, like all the MCU films, and yeah, I always like to give it a rewatch every once in a while. At number 18, we have Captain Marvel. Now, this may come as kind of a shock to some of you guys, seeing how far ahead of a lot of the other MCU movies this one is, but let me explain. I initially wasn't too sold on this movie when I first watched it. I really didn't like the beginning, and then I liked the last two-thirds of this movie, and when I gave it a rewatch, I did like it as a whole, and I feel like for the most part, I still do really enjoy it. You know, I think for me, personally, it is a pretty memorable movie, a lot more memorable than the sequel. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. You know, it introduced Captain Marvel. It was the first superheroine movie for the MCU. I think really my only gripe after giving it a rewatch was the fact that she was overpowered for the villains that she had to face in this movie. I mean, she literally could have just solved all of the problems by just blasting the villains away with one pump of her fist. But, you know, it introduced the Skrulls, so I think they were pretty cool. And overall, I just really enjoyed this movie, and I enjoy giving it a rewatch every once in a while. At number 17, we have Deadpool and Wolverine. This is a movie that I never thought we would ever get from the MCU. Starting with the cons, the gore and profanity were definitely a bit much for me at times. I feel like they were trying to squeeze a little too much into the 2-hour runtime, and I feel like I could have used a little more action in a few of the scenes in this movie. Negatives aside, the chemistry between Deadpool and Wolverine was really great, the jokes cut really deep, and it was a surprisingly nice send-off to the 20th Century Fox era of Marvel movies. Overall, this is a movie that is a fun treat for comic book fans and film fans alike. At number 16, we have Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, this is a film that I feel is a proper start to Phase 4. Shang-Chi was a breath of fresh air for the MCU. While it still follows the basic formula that is used for most MCU movies, this film changes things up by introducing a new mystical side of the Marvel Universe, while also doing some course correcting and showing off some impressive martial arts action. It was really hard for me to find any gripes for this one, but I think my main one is that it feels a little slow in some parts when they are trying to establish important plot details. Overall, this is a fun martial arts adventure movie that leaves me baffled as to why we still haven't gotten a sequel. At number 15, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I am so glad that James Gunn was given the chance to come back and finish this Guardians trilogy. This film is a little more serious than the first two films, but it still has humor and heart. You do have to watch the Avengers films to know what is going on with this one, but the story still flows well even if you miss some of the previous MCU films. I'm still not sure how I feel with the way the characters were left off by the end of the film, but I think everyone's arcs were well-rounded by the end of it. Overall, this film concludes a great trilogy and is full of well-written characters with powerful arcs, particularly Rocket Raccoon. At number 14, we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, I'm a fan of Evil Dead and the original Spider-Man trilogy, both directed by Sam Raimi, so the fact that Sam Raimi was brought onto this film to direct is a major plus for me. For the negatives, this film has some slow parts, the CGI is a bit rough in some areas, and the choice for the main antagonist is kind of questionable. However, I heard before the release of this movie that Sam Raimi was brought on because they wanted to add more horror elements without letting the film be a full-blown horror story, and the final product kind of shows. The introduction of America's Chavez was pretty good, the effects are stylized, and the surprise cameos are actually pretty cool. Overall, this movie screams Sam Raimi, and I love it. It's not as good as the first Doctor Strange movie, but I always find myself coming back to it just because I enjoyed the horrifically goofy energy that Sam Raimi brings to the series. At number 13, we have Doctor Strange, directed by Scott Derrickson, director of The Black Phone. And I gotta say, you guys, I still think this is one of the most unique MCU movies that has been put out by Marvel Studios so far. This is another movie that I think is a really big spectacle movie, kind of like the first Thor movie, but even more so with the way that Scott Derrickson does the effects in this film. Like I said in my previous ranking video, the only problem I really had with this movie was the simplicity in the fight between Doctor Strange and Dormammu. Wow, rough cut, sorry. The fight between Doctor Strange and Dormammu at the end of this film. It just kind of seemed a little anticlimactic with how fast he was able to deal with Dormammu, especially because it was really towards the end of the film. But other than that, that's really the only gripe I had with it. And I thought it was a really good movie, and it's still pretty high on my list. At number 12, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp. So I feel like this is an underrated movie in the MCU. I said in my last ranking video that the first Ant-Man movie felt like a prototype for this movie, because I feel like this movie is definitely more polished in its tone, and I think the inclusion of Wasp really helped this movie to get the plot going. And the fact that this movie is more of a heist movie, and basically establishing that the Ant-Man movies are heist movies, really just works more towards its favor. It's funny that after all these years, really the only gripe that I have with this film is the second after credits scene with the ant playing the drums, and really that's the only problem that I could think of. I know it's kind of strange for me to put this one up so high over a lot of other MCU movies that definitely probably have a lot more to offer, but you know, I still really enjoy the Ant-Man movies, and I think this is definitely the best one. At number 11, we have Spider-Man Homecoming, the first of the Spider-Man trilogy of films set within the MCU. And I think I remember saying in my last ranking video that the biggest problem I had with this movie was the way that they had Peter Parker's inspiration for, you know, doing his thing as Spider-Man was to impress Tony Stark so that he could become an Avenger. This movie completely left out the whole with great power comes great responsibility thing, but we do get that later on in later movies, so really that kind of solves its problem for the most part. I still think this is a really strong Spider-Man movie. It's fun, it's rewatchable, and it's just great. I really do enjoy this one, and I revisit it very often. It's so good. Alright, so now we're in our top 10. Because of phases 4 and 5, there have been some changes in the positions, and so this is my new top 10 as of 2025. So at number 10, we have Black Panther. Now, I said in my first video, you know, this isn't like 97% on Rotten Tomatoes good, but I think it's still really good. I think it's a very inspiring movie, and Chadwick does a great job as Black Panther, and it definitely shows all these years later, especially after his passing. I did mention in the last ranking video that the CGI fight towards the end really starts to get kind of rough, but I don't know, after all these years I've kind of grown to like it, and I really think that it just kind of shows the style of this movie, and yeah, I don't know, it just really, I have very nostalgic feelings towards this movie. I'm also a really big fan of Ryan Coogler as a director, and I really want to watch some more of his filmography. And so the fact that he got to direct a couple of MCU movies, just, I find really awesome. So this one still has a really good place in my heart, and that's why it's number 10 on my top 10. At number 9, we have Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Yes, this one is my second favorite so far. As a standalone Captain America movie, I think this is definitely the best, considering Civil War is really kind of more of an Avengers movie. But, you know, this one was one of the first ones to kind of really set its own tone as its own type of like genre movie. This is really more of like a spy thriller movie. And as I've gotten older, I've really found that I really do like those types of movies. So this one is definitely up my alley. And that's why it's at number 9 on my list of rankings. I really enjoy this movie, and I'm hoping the new Captain America movie kind of has some of the tone that this movie had. It's just really good. At number 8, we have the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So I definitely think this is the best of the Guardians trilogy. I still really think that it was very well written. You know, the pacing was good, the jokes were good, the cast is great, and James Gunn just did a really good job adapting this team that not a whole lot of people really knew about. I think it is still a very great setup for the future movies that come out later, and it was definitely cool seeing the Guardians interact with the Avengers finally in those later Avengers movies, and we have this movie to thank for that. So, you know, I don't remember what I griped about in the initial ranking video that I did, but I'm sure those gripes are still there, but it's still in my top 10. I still really enjoyed this movie, and I love to rewatch it any chance that I get. At number 7, we have Captain America Civil War. What else can I say about this movie, really? Honestly, this is a really awesome movie. It really makes use of all the MCU characters that had been introduced at the time, and it even introduced Black Panther and Spider-Man. So, what is there not to like? I really enjoy how this one still has that spy thriller feel that Captain America the Winter Soldier had, and this one is just so rewatchable. I really enjoy giving it a rewatch any chance that I get. And I still think that the main issue I have with this one is that you do kind of have to watch some of the other Avengers movies to know what is going on with this one. So I think that is definitely a negative against it. But for the most part, I think so long as you have watched those movies, and even if you haven't watched those movies, they pretty much show off what everybody can do pretty well in this movie. So you get a good idea of what each character is about and what they're able to do. And overall, I just still really enjoy it. So it's still in my top 10. So at number 6, we have Spider-Man Far From Home. This one did get knocked down by another Spider-Man movie, and I'll explain why in a bit. I mentioned in the initial ranking video that there was a lot of things that I really enjoyed about this one, and I don't really remember what a lot of the gripes were. I think my main gripe with this one was the same as Civil War. You just kind of had to be caught up on the Avengers movies in order to know what was going on with this one. And I think that was especially the case because this one really wrapped up the events of Endgame really well. And it was a nice, you know, sort of like epilogue to Phase 3 of the MCU. And I think that's still the case. I think that it is still a really good movie. I don't remember a whole lot. I need to give it a rewatch. But I still remember it being really good. And the parts that I do remember, I think were strong enough to justify it being in the number 6 spot. So this one is still a top 10 for me, and I always love to give it a rewatch whenever I get the chance. At number 5, we have Spider-Man No Way Home. This film blatantly plays on the nostalgia of Marvel movie fans, but man is it smart for doing that. This film is like a high-budget fan fiction with the way that it brings back past actors from both the Sam Raimi trilogy and the Mark Webb duology of Spider-Man movies. My main problems with this film are that the plot is very heavily reliant on the multiverse, the cameos, and fan nostalgia. However, the fact that the film actually did bring back a lot of the actors from past Marvel projects and had them interact with the MCU is very much what fans wanted to see, and I appreciate Marvel for doing that. The film is very rewatchable, and it's a lot of fun. Overall, while the film is clearly nostalgia bait, it still offers a fun Spider-Man film that is sure to please fans of each iteration of our favorite webhead. And then for the rest of the rankings, if you've seen that initial ranking video, you know it's pretty much the same. So at number 4, we have Avengers Infinity War. This is the first part of the 2-part story that began all the way with Iron Man, and it was definitely worth the wait. I enjoyed this movie for the fact that we finally get to see a lot of the MCU characters interact with each other. Josh Brolin as Thanos was amazing, and then of course the ending that shocked many audiences around the world. Some of the issues that I had with this movie were the fact that not every MCU character was present, and that we didn't get to see how Thanos got the Power Stone, but those are really just minor nitpicks. They could only stuff so much into a 2-hour film, so I could kind of understand why they left a lot of stuff out. That being said, this movie was an experience, and I don't know how it was going to be topped. At number 3, we have Avengers Endgame, and boy did they top Infinity War. This movie had a lot that it needed to deliver to satisfy the hype that the MCU had been building up over the past 10 years. And I think that it did it perfectly. I really like the acting from most of the actors in this movie, especially Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, and Robert Downey Jr. I liked how characters like Ant-Man played a really important role in the plot, and I really liked the Avengers Assemble scene at the end. I definitely do have some issues with some of the creative choices of this film, much like Infinity War, but, you know, they can only stuff so much into such a 3-hour long movie. So I could kind of understand why they made the decisions that they did, and overall, it doesn't really change the fact that it's still a really good movie. This film delivered exactly what fans wanted to see and what they've been waiting to see, and it did it very well. So that's why it's in number 3 on my list. At number 2, we have Iron Man, the film that started it all. Of course, this is the one directed by Jon Favreau and starring Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I put this one at number 2 because I definitely think this is the best written MCU film. You know, everybody that is a part of this movie has a part to play in the plot, and it just wraps up really well by the end of the movie. Really, the only problem that I mentioned in that initial ranking video with this movie is that the final battle between Iron Man and Ironmonger was a little short, but that's really more of a nitpick. If it's been a while since you've given this movie a watch, I definitely recommend going back and rewatching it and just seeing how it all began, because when you watch this and then think about what point we're at now, it's really just kind of amazing to see how far we've come, and it's just great. It's a really good movie, and I always want to give it a rewatch. And finally, my number 1 MCU film that has been my number 1 MCU film ever since I first saw it, Marvel's The Avengers, the first Avengers movie. And I gotta say, you guys, even after Infinity War, even after Endgame, even after a lot of the more recent MCU films that we've gotten, no theater experience has ever given me such a thrill and such enjoyment as I had when I first watched this movie in theaters. I think I watched this movie like 3 times when it came out in theaters, and no other film has really been that way for me since. This, I think, is my all-time favorite movie. Of course, for some of you guys that want to hear about my critiques of this movie, of course there's stuff to critique. I think some of the writing is a little weird in some parts, especially when the Chitauri are defeated at the end, Phantom Menace style. The beginning is kind of a slow start when compared to the rest of the movie. Some of the lines of dialogue in here, written I think by Joss Whedon, are a little strange. But for the most part, this movie still really checks a lot of the boxes off for me when it comes to superhero movies. It's got the action, it's got the heart, it's got the great cast, it's got the visual effects, it's got the really good direction, it's got it all. And like I said, no movie has even come close to the experience that I had when I first watched this movie in the theaters for the first time. So that is why the first Avengers movie is my number 1 MCU movie of all time. And that is my personal ranking of all the MCU films released thus far. And I probably won't be doing an update immediately after the new Captain America film comes out. It really just kind of depends on how I'm feeling. I'll probably hold off until Thunderbolts comes out, and then I'll do a re-ranking and include those 2 films sometime later on before Phase 6 comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, consider giving this video a like and consider hitting that subscribe button down below. Let me know what your personal rankings of the MCU movies are down below in the comments also. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next movie-related video. Later.